have a rather unique name. I've never actually met anyone that has my name before. Growing up in the United States, I was often called various versions of it, but I took it in stride and I accepted it. After all, my name looks like the English alphabet vomited as many vowels as possible and didn't know where to put the A's, the E's, the I's, or the O's. But something that I noticed whenever I would introduce myself is that I'd always say, "Hi, my name is so-and-so, and I'm an X," where X was my occupation at the time, or whatever helped pay the bills, or what I did for a living. But it was almost like I rushed past the first part, past my name, and onto the second part, like that defined who I was. Has anybody been curious enough to look up the meaning of their names? My name comes from my grandfather on the paternal side. His name was Ilya, which means Elijah in Hebrew. And for the past 100 years, the most popular male first name in the United States was James, which means to take by the heel. And the most popular female first name was Mary, which means to be adventurous. I always thought the names that we have were our own. Like they couldn't be taken away. Like we were almost entitled to them. I could go ahead and legally change my name, sure. But to have no name entirely? I didn't think such a thing was possible until it actually happened to me. Until I had to start introducing myself as a number and not a name. In 2013, I enlisted in the United States military. In 2015, our commander sat us all down and told us that 6 months from now, we'd all be deployed to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, where I was to do detainee operations and help keep the peace in Camp 5 and Camp 6. And sure enough, 6 months later in May 2016, I was deployed to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And when I got there, when I got off the airplane, the first thing that hit me wasn't that I'd be away from my family and friends for a year, but it was the humidity. It smacked me right in the face. I could hardly breathe. But Cuba was gorgeous. There were rolling hills you could climb, paved streets, a gym, concerts, even a bowling alley. Children were even going to school in the morning. By almost all accounts, it was like I never left the United States. However, just 2 or 3 miles down the road was a prison where I worked as a guard. And for security purposes and privacy concerns, I was given a 6-digit number that I had to wear on the right side of my chest. And I was called this number for 12 hours a day for a year. It was Velcro, so I could take it off and put it back on. And that's what I would literally do. I would literally take off my last name on my uniform, and I put this 6-digit number on. And I was called this number, even by the detainees. The detainees. They did not have any names either, but numbers. They called us by our numbers, and we called them by theirs. No names existed where I was. But something interesting began to happen to me after this repeated rebranding of who I was. I remember when I was looking through the one-way mirror just to see what the detainees were up to. Oftentimes, I would catch my reflection in the mirror, and all I could see was the 6-digit number on the right side of my chest. I couldn't tell if I was a prison guard or the prisoner. But I powered through. And after a year, I made it back home safely. But when I got home, I began to ask a question. I was in such a unique environment. Not too many people get the opportunity to go to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. So I reflected on my experience, and I asked the question, does my name define me? And has this rebranding of individuality happened before? It happened to me because of security purposes and privacy concerns. But I was curious, has this happened to another group of people in the past? Have their names or identities been altered in some way? Or has the attempt been made to do so? So I did some research, and I found out that, yes, this has happened before. Here's one example. the Stanford Prison Experiment, conducted by Stanford University in 1971. The purpose of this experiment was to find out the roles of group cohesion, group validation, and the power of symbols. There were 24 college-age participants that volunteered. 12 of them were given the role of prisoner. The other 12, the prison guard. And each one of them lived up to those roles and to those labels. They envisioned how they should have acted just by being called as such, regardless of their true personality traits. Here's another example. In the Dagara culture in Africa, there are these naming ceremonies and naming rituals where 6 months into a gestation period, the embryo is whispered its name and its purpose, and it needs to live up to that name and that purpose as soon as it enters this world. But it was almost like it was named prematurely, like it wasn't given the ability to name itself or create its own purpose. One was already bestowed upon it, and it had to live up to it as soon as it entered this world. Now, it's at this point of the story, you might take a step back and say, naming ceremonies and naming rituals, we can't have that in the 21st century. Life moves way too quickly, especially in the Western Hemisphere. To which I would say, what about nicknames? Aren't we already doing this metaphorical rejuvenation, perhaps without knowing why we do it in the first place? I think we give ourselves nicknames because it feels right, because on a deeper level, it resonates with who we truly are, because we prefer to be called a nickname that we either grant ourselves or somebody else has granted for us. And we prefer to be called that other than our given birth name. So after finding all this out, after finding out that groups of people's names and identities have been altered by another group of people, I asked myself, are we able to do it to ourselves? Are we able to change the meaning of our name? And I think the answer to that question is yes. I think we are able to change who we want to be at the individual level. Family, friends, and pressure from society should not get to determine that, but instead we are granted that ourselves. Understand this, the world wants to assign you a role, and once you accept that role, you are vastly limited in what you can accomplish. In the past, only the aristocracy was able to change their perceptions about themselves through commissioned pieces of artwork. The rest of society played the limited roles that were fostered upon them. But a change in this dynamic was first observed in 1656 with the Spanish painter Velázquez and his painting of Las Meninas that we see here. And we even see Velázquez in his own painting. Who he is drawing, we cannot directly observe, but we do know that it is the king and queen of Spain through a mirror in the background. But in Las Meninas, Velázquez is far more powerfully and far more prominently portrayed than even the aristocracy, even the king and queen of Spain. He is drawing how he sees them, how he wishes to perceive them, how he is imagining them to be, and not the other way around. So what does this all mean? The character that you are born with is not necessarily who you are. You have the ability to change the meaning of your name. This act of defiance is Promethean, and it makes you responsible for your own actions. Mold yourself like clay. Become an artist recreating yourself. Take off the labels imposed on to you by others. It's only Velcro. So what can we do to avoid this false identity? If we're led to believe that money, fame, or fortune will make us happy, and we go down this path, we might be left in a kind of emptiness, a kind of void. Growing up, we're usually told what to do by those in positions of power and authority. Family, friends, coaches, mentors, instructors. Even though they have our best interests and their best intentions in mind, they might inadvertently steer us down a path that isn't of our own choosing. If we're not careful, we might absorb the other person's thoughts, actions, ethics, their everyday day of life. If we're not careful, we might absorb that for ourselves, and it might show up in our everyday patterns of life, our everyday thoughts and actions. So what can we do to avoid this false identity? First, realize who or what those external forces are that are trying to rebrand you into something that you don't want to be. Ask yourself a couple of questions. Who is making all the decisions for me? Am I learning and growing from those decisions? Or am I merely following the thoughts and actions and desires of others? After you've realized who those forces are, rebel against them. Growing up, my parents usually told me what to do. Where to go to school, who to hang out with, even what time to come home, what to study. Eventually, I had enough, and I wanted to make a decision on my own and suffer the consequences, whatever they may be. It's actually one of the reasons why I decided to enlist in the military. I wanted to make a decision on my own and just see what would happen. So, a sink or swim situation or a trial by fire is a perfect scenario to know what you are truly capable of. After that, avoid copying another person's actions exactly. If we see somebody successful do actions A, B, and C, we might be led to believe that if we copy those actions, A, B, and C, that we would in turn be successful ourselves. But that was their path and not yours. Their identity and not yours. Plus, what may have worked for them might not necessarily work for you. At a certain point, you need to diverge from other people's paths and try to strike it out on your own. Just because I inherited my grandfather's name does not mean that I have to live up to it. So from our actions, we get the meaning of our names. Our names are the symbolic manifestations of those actions. So please don't try to define my name based on my looks, height, appearance. Please don't try to look up the meaning of my name either just to see if it's one who gives TEDx talks. My name has no meaning, and neither does yours, for we make our own meaning. We look to the past to change the present for a better future. We've seen how people's names and identities have been altered in some way, shape, or form, or at least the attempt has been made to do so. I first experienced this when I was in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. But it wasn't until I arrived back home did I realize how much power we truly have. We're able to mold ourselves in our own image, our own vision, our own creation. And having your own originality, your own individuality, your own idiosyncrasies is a wonderful feeling to behold. And it is one of life's most essential tasks. So in an enlightened society, when you introduce yourself, all that needs to be said isn't any irrelevant background information. But instead, all that needs to be said is your name. It was a pleasure speaking to everyone today. And my name is Ilian